The beer mug shattered
here?
against the wooden floor with a violent
I
crack
can
that
go wherever
silenced
I please.
Harper's Roadhouse instantly. You think you're something special? Viper Jackson's voice cut through the sudden quiet like a blade. His massive hand wrapped around the collar of the small woman who'd been wiping down tables. The snake tattoo coiling around his thick neck seemed to writhe as he pulled her closer, his breath reeking of whiskey and menace. I asked you a simple question, sweetheart. This bar pays protection, or this bar burns? Which one's it going to be? Jessica Harper kept her brown eyes fixed on the floor, her body language screaming submission, even as 10 members of the Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club rose from their seats, forming a predatory circle around her. She was maybe 5'4" in her worn sneakers, her white server's shirt hanging loose on her slight frame. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look even younger than her 32 years. Everything about her whispered, ordinary, forgettable, weak. But in exactly 15 minutes, Viper Jackson would be on his knees, begging for forgiveness. If you believe no woman should be underestimated because of how she looks, type respect below and let us know where you're watching from. The tension in Harper's Roadhouse had been building for 20 minutes before that glass shattered. Tommy Martinez, the 24-year-old bartender, had been watching Jessica work her evening shift with growing curiosity. There was something different about her tonight, something that nagged at the edges of his awareness. It had started when she'd reached across table 12 to collect empty bottles. The overhead light had caught something metallic on her right hand, a thick, military-style ring that seemed oddly substantial for a simple server. The ring bore an intricate design that Tommy couldn't quite make out, but it moved with the weight of real gold, not the cheap costume jewelry most of the staff wore. Jessica had been folding napkins at the service station with an almost robotic precision, each triangle identical to the last, when Tommy noticed her unconscious scanning pattern. Every 30 seconds, her eyes swept the room in a methodical grid: door, windows, kitchen entrance, back exit. It wasn't the casual awareness of a waitress watching for customers, it was something else entirely. Her posture was another puzzle. Despite the loose-fitting uniform meant to hide her figure, Tommy could see the way she held herself, shoulders square, spine straight, weight balanced on the balls of her feet. She moved with an efficiency that bordered on tactical, never wasting motion, never turning her back to the main room for more than a few seconds. The Desert Vipers had rolled in just after 8 p.m., their Harleys announcing their arrival with a thunderous roar that made every patron in the small roadside bar tense up. This wasn't their first visit to establishments along the highway near Camp Pendleton, and their reputation preceded them like a dark cloud. 3 bars in the past month had mysteriously caught fire after refusing their protection services. Jessica had watched them enter while she methodically arranged condiments with geometric accuracy. Tommy had immediately started sweating when he saw the skull patches on their leather vests, but Jessica's reaction had been different. Her movements had become more controlled, more precise, as if some internal protocol had activated. "That's them," Tommy had whispered to her. "The Desert Vipers. They're the ones who burned down Rodriguez's place in Oceanside." She'd simply nodded, continuing her work with that unsettling military precision, but Tommy caught something else, the way her right hand had unconsciously moved to touch that mysterious ring, like a talisman or reminder of something important. Jessica Harper had come to work at Harper's Roadhouse 6 months ago, appearing one Tuesday morning with a simple resume and a quiet demeanor that immediately endeared her to the owner, Frank Harper. She'd been reliable, efficient, and invisible in the way that made her perfect for a roadside bar that valued discretion over drama. What Frank didn't know was that Jessica had chosen Harper's specifically because of its location, 3 miles from the main gate of Camp Pendleton, close enough to feel connected to the military world she'd left behind, far enough to maintain the anonymity she desperately needed. The bar served a mixture of Marines on weekend liberty, local contractors, and highway travelers, creating the perfect environment for someone who wanted to blend in while staying connected to her roots. Viper Jackson had made his entrance like a conquering king, all 6'3" of him swaggering through the door with his arms spread wide. The snake tattoo that gave him his nickname started at his jaw and disappeared into his leather vest, and his shaved head gleamed under the bar's amber lights. His 9 companions spread out behind him in what Jessica quietly noted was a tactically sound dispersal pattern, covering exits, maintaining sight lines, establishing dominance over the space. "Evening, folks," Viper had announced to the dozen or so regular patrons, his voice carrying that particular tone of false friendliness that preceded violence. "Don't mind us. We're just here for a friendly drink and a little business discussion." The regulars, mostly veterans from the nearby base and local blue-collar workers, had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sheriff Patricia Hayes, a grizzled 48-year-old who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to serve and protect, had been nursing a coffee at the corner booth. She'd set down her cup slowly, her weathered hand moving to rest near her hip, where her service weapon would have been if she'd been on duty. Jessica had approached their table with her order pad, keeping her eyes down and her voice soft. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" That's when the first sign of trouble had sparked. One of the bikers, a wiry man with meth-rotted teeth, had slapped her backside as she walked past. "How about you start with a smile, sweetheart? You look like someone died." She'd simply stepped out of reach with a fluid movement that looked accidental but wasn't, continuing to take their orders without acknowledging the assault. Tommy had started to move from behind the bar, his young face flushed with anger, but Jessica had caught his eye and given an almost imperceptible shake of her head. The bikers had ordered beer, lots of it, and Jessica had served them efficiently and quietly. Her movements remained precise and economical, but Tommy noticed something new, the way she'd begun unconsciously checking her smartphone. The device looked military-grade, with a reinforced case and what appeared to be an encrypted interface. Each time she glanced at it, her expression grew more focused, more alert. That's when Viper's attention had settled on her like a physical weight, and Tommy realized they were about to witness something that would change everything. The confrontation began when Jessica was wiping down a nearby table and Viper called out, "Hey, server girl, where's Harper? We need to discuss some business." His voice carried the casual arrogance of someone used to immediate compliance. "Mr. Harper is in Phoenix for the week," Jessica had replied quietly, not meeting his eyes. "I'm just covering shifts." Her voice was soft, submissive, exactly what Viper expected from a young woman in service work. "Well then," Viper had stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over her, "I guess you'll have to relay a message for us. Tell Harper that the Desert Vipers are offering our protection services to this fine establishment. $5,000 a month, and we guarantee nothing bad happens to this place." Jessica had continued wiping the already clean table with methodical strokes. "I'll let him know you stopped by." Her response was professional, neutral, giving nothing for Viper to latch on to. That's when his demeanor had shifted from fake friendly to genuinely menacing. "I don't think you understand, sweetheart. This isn't a social call. This is a business requirement. Every bar from here to San Diego is under our protection. Those that refuse—" He'd pulled out a lighter, flicking it open and closed with practiced menace. "Well, accidents happen, electrical fires, gas leaks, tragic stuff." "I understand," Jessica had said softly, "but I can't make decisions for Mr. Harper. I just serve drinks and clean tables." Her submission seemed genuine, but Sheriff Hayes, watching from her corner booth, noticed something the bikers missed. The way Jessica's weight had shifted imperceptibly to a more balanced stance. The formation the bikers had unconsciously taken around her had a name in military tactics: encirclement. But there were weaknesses in their positioning that Jessica had cataloged automatically. The one by the jukebox favored his right leg, suggesting an old injury. The 2 by the pool table were focused on intimidation rather than observation, missing Sheriff Hayes's slow shift to a better defensive position. Viper himself was standing too close, inside what military tacticians called the reactionary gap, a mistake born of overconfidence. "Look," Viper had said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm trying to be nice here, but you're making this difficult. How about this? You seem like a smart girl. You convince Harper to see things our way, and maybe I'll throw in a little bonus for you." His eyes had raked over her figure with obvious intent. What do you make here? Minimum wage plus tips? I could make sure you're taken care of." The sexual undertone was unmistakable, and several patrons had tensed, reading the threat in his words. "Thank you, but I'm fine with my current arrangement," Jessica had replied, finally looking up at him. Her brown eyes were calm, almost serene, which seemed to infuriate him more than defiance would have. That's when he'd reached out and wrapped his meaty fingers around her upper arm, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. "Listen here, you stuck-up little—" "I'm going to have to ask you to take your hand off the lady." Sheriff Hayes had stood up, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Even in civilian clothes, she had that unmistakable bearing of a career soldier. Viper had laughed, not releasing Jessica's arm. "And what are you going to do about it, Lady Cop? You're off duty, out of your jurisdiction, and outnumbered 10-1. Sit back down before you get hurt." The air in Harper's had grown thick with the promise of violence, and Jessica's fingers had found the small piece of metal hanging from the chain around her neck, hidden beneath her loose shirt. The worn dog tag was warm against her skin, a reminder of who she used to be, who she was trying not to be anymore. 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, 15 confirmed kills, 4 bronze stars, a Purple Heart. All of it locked away in a storage unit along with her dress blues and her Force Recon chevrons. Jessica had come to Harper's looking for quiet, for peace, for a place where she could just be invisible and serve drinks to people who didn't know what it felt like to have blood on their hands. Her mind drifted to Operation Phoenix, that scorching day in Ramadi when everything had changed. She'd been a lance corporal then, part of a force reconnaissance team tasked with gathering intelligence on insurgent weapons caches. The mission had gone sideways when her 3-person team, herself, Lance Corporal Martinez and PFC Thompson, had stumbled into a well-planned ambush. The schoolhouse they'd been using as an observation post had come under heavy fire from 3 directions. For 17 hours, they'd held their position, taking turns on the rifle while calling in air support that couldn't get through the anti-aircraft fire. Martinez had taken a round through the shoulder in hour 4. Thompson had caught shrapnel in his leg during hour 12. By hour 15, they were down to their last magazine of ammunition each, and Jessica had been forced to make the kind of decision that haunted warriors for the rest of their lives. The evacuation helicopter was finally inbound, but it could only take 2 passengers, the wounded and 1 healthy escort. "You go with them," Martinez had whispered, his face gray with blood loss. "That's an order, Harper. Get Thompson out of here and make sure these intel reports reach command." But Jessica had already made her decision. She'd loaded both wounded Marines into the helicopter and stayed behind to provide covering fire for their extraction. For 2 more hours, she'd held that schoolhouse alone, picking off insurgents with precision shots while calling in her own coordinates for artillery strikes that came closer and closer to her position. When the 2nd helicopter finally reached her, she'd been found unconscious from blood loss, burns covering 30% of her body, enough shrapnel in her to set off metal detectors for the rest of her life. Martinez and Thompson had both survived. The intelligence she'd gathered had led to the capture of a major weapons depot and saved dozens of American lives. But the girl who'd enlisted at 18, full of patriotic fervor and dreams of serving her country, had died in that schoolhouse. The woman who'd emerged from 18 months of recovery and rehabilitation was someone else entirely, harder, quieter, carrying secrets that civilian therapists couldn't understand and military psychologists couldn't heal. She'd tried to go back to active duty, but the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way she'd freeze up during training exercises that reminded her too much of Ramadi, it had all made her a liability rather than an asset. The Corps had offered her a medical discharge with full honors, and she'd taken it, along with the promise to herself that she'd never put anyone else in danger because of her damaged psyche. Now, feeling Viper's grip tighten on her arm and seeing the predatory circle of bikers closing around her, Jessica felt that old, familiar sensation, the shift from civilian to warrior, from victim to something far more dangerous. Sheriff Hayes had been watching Jessica Harper for months, and something about the woman had always nagged at her military-trained instincts. It wasn't just the way she moved. though that precise economical gait was familiar to anyone who'd spent time around special operations personnel. It was the little things, the unconscious habits that marked someone with serious combat experience. The way Jessica's eyes swept the room every 30 seconds, cataloging threats and exits. The way she positioned herself at tables to maintain clear sightlines to all entrances. The way she'd react to sudden noises, not jumping or startling like a civilian, but instantly assessing the source and potential threat level. Tonight, with the desert vipers circling her like wolves, those patterns had become more pronounced. Jessica's breathing remained controlled and steady, her voice calm despite the obvious threat. But Hayes could see the micro-adjustments in her stance, the way her weight had shifted to the balls of her feet, the almost imperceptible relaxation of her shoulders that preceded combat readiness. Tommy, behind the bar, had grabbed the baseball bat they kept for emergencies, but his hands were shaking with adrenaline and inexperience. The regulars, mostly veterans themselves, had recognized the shift in atmosphere and were preparing for violence in their own ways. But their preparation looked clumsy compared to Jessica's fluid, unconscious adaptation to threat. Hayes noticed something else. The way Jessica's right hand kept moving to that military ring, rolling it slightly with her thumb. It was a nervous habit, but the ring itself told a story to those who knew how to read it. The weight, the craftsmanship, the deliberate design visible even from across the room, that wasn't something you could buy at a jewelry store. "You know what your problem is?" Viper had snarled, his face inches from Jessica's. "You think you're better than us. Think you're too good to show proper respect. Maybe I need to remind you of your place." His free hand had grabbed the front of her shirt, bunching the fabric in his fist. Jessica had remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her eyes steady. To everyone watching, she looked like a terrified server trying not to provoke more violence. But Hayes, with her 3 combat tours worth of experience, had seen something else. The way Jessica's hands had positioned themselves, not defensively, but in a configuration that would allow for rapid, devastating counterattack. The way she'd angled her body to create space for movement while appearing to cower. The way her eyes had briefly flickered to assess each biker's position and potential threat level. This wasn't a frightened civilian. This was a predator allowing itself to appear as prey, and Hayes felt a chill of recognition run down her spine. She'd seen that kind of controlled stillness before, in the moments before special operations personnel engaged multiple hostiles in close-quarters combat. Hayes's own hand moved unconsciously to her phone, not to call for backup, but to record what she was increasingly certain would be a moment that needed to be preserved. Her thumb hovered over the video function as she watched Jessica Harper, small-town waitress, prepare for what Hayes suspected would be a very short, very violent demonstration of why appearances could be fatally deceiving. The military ring caught the light again as Jessica's hand moved, and Hayes caught a glimpse of the design, an eagle, wings spread, clutching something in its talons. Her breath caught as recognition hit her like a physical blow. She knew that ring, knew what it represented, and suddenly everything about Jessica Harper made terrifying, perfect sense. "Last chance," Viper had growled, his grip tightening on Jessica's shirt. "You're going to call Harper right now and tell him he's got a new business partner, or things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone here." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Every person in the bar seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for Jessica's response. Tommy's knuckles were white on the baseball bat. Sheriff Hayes had her phone out, finger poised over the emergency call button. The other patrons had slowly begun positioning themselves for either fight or flight. "I can't do that," Jessica said simply, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the hushed bar. Viper's face flushed red with anger and wounded pride. Here was this slip of a girl, maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, defying him in front of his entire crew and a bar full of witnesses. His reputation, his authority, everything that kept the Desert Vipers in line depended on absolute dominance in situations exactly like this. "Wrong answer," he snarled, and yanked with all his considerable strength. The sound of ripping fabric was shocking in its finality, the white cotton parting from collar to mid-chest as Viper pulled with enough force to lift Jessica slightly off her feet. She stumbled backward, the ruined shirt hanging open, revealing the black tank top underneath. But it was what that tank top revealed that changed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if the universe itself needed a moment to process what had just been exposed. Several phones appeared, people recording what they sensed was a moment they'd want to remember, but Jessica didn't seem to notice or care. Tommy's baseball bat clattered to the floor behind the bar as his hands went slack with shock. Sheriff Hayes felt her training kick in, her phone automatically switching to video mode as her finger moved without conscious thought. The other patrons leaned forward, squinting to make sure they were seeing what they thought they were seeing. Viper Jackson stood frozen, his hand still clutching the torn fabric, his mouth slightly open as his brain tried to process what he was looking at. Behind him, his fellow desert vipers had gone equally still, the predatory confidence draining from their faces like water from a broken cup. Because across Jessica Harper's back, visible through the thin fabric of the tank top, was a work of art that told a story of service, sacrifice, and elite warrior status that made every veteran in the room catch their breath in recognition and respect. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps spread majestically across Jessica's shoulder blades, the detailed artwork so precise you could make out individual feathers on the eagle's wings. But it was the text beneath that made several veterans in the bar gasp audibly. First Force Recon was inked in bold letters, marking her as a member of one of the most elite special operations units in the Marine Corps. Below that, her designation. Gunny's GTJ Harper 0311, the military occupational specialty code for infantry, the tip of the spear, the ones who go where others fear to tread. But the tattoo was only part of the story. Surrounding it were scars, the kind of scars that told their own tales to those who knew how to read them. A puckered bullet wound near her left shoulder blade, the telltale marks of shrapnel along her ribs. A long, jagged scar that disappeared beneath the tank top's hem, suggesting a blade wound that had required serious medical attention. Force Recon, Sheriff Hayes breathed, her voice carrying clearly in the silence. Holy hell! The transformation in Jessica's bearing was subtle but unmistakable. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken a fighting stance, hadn't done anything overtly threatening. But something in the way she held herself had changed, like a switch being flipped from civilian to warrior. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its soft, submissive quality. "Mr. Jackson," she said, using Viper's real name, which she shouldn't have known. "I believe you owe me an apology for destroying my property." The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. Viper's grip on the torn fabric loosened, and the white cotton fluttered to the floor like a surrender flag. "How do you know my name?" His voice had lost its commanding bass, climbing higher with uncertainty. Jessica didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned slowly, giving everyone in the bar a clear view of the military artwork and battle scars that decorated her back. When she spoke again, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Stephen Jackson, dishonorably discharged from the Army 6 years ago for stealing and selling military equipment, founded the Desert Vipers 3 years ago, currently wanted for questioning in 4 arson cases and 2 aggravated assaults." She paused, letting that sink in. "I make it my business to know who's threatening the establishments in my area of operation." "Your area of—" Viper started, then stopped, the full implications hitting him like a sledgehammer. From the corner booth, Sheriff Hayes slowly stood up. "Gunnery Sergeant Harper," she said, her voice carrying the snap of command despite her civilian clothes. "First Force Recon, Operation Phoenix, Ramadi, 2007. You're the one who held that schoolhouse for 17 hours while calling in artillery strikes on your own position." Jessica's stance shifted slightly, an unconscious response to a superior officer. "Ma'am, I had help. Lance Corporal Martinez and PFC Thompson. They didn't make it out." Actually, they did, Hayes said quietly. Martinez runs a construction company in 29 Palms now. Thompson teaches high school in Oceanside. Because of what you did, they both came home. The intelligence you gathered led to the destruction of the largest weapons cache in that sector. 37 American lives saved minimum. The Desert Vipers were backing toward the door now, their earlier formation completely broken, but they found their path blocked by 5 men who had quietly repositioned themselves during the conversation. Each one had the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat. "Leaving so soon?" asked one of them, a Hispanic man with marine tattoos covering both forearms. "But you haven't apologized to the gunny yet." Viper's face flushed red, caught between humiliation and his need to maintain face in front of his crew. "Look, we didn't know she was, if we'd known—" "Known what?" Jessica stepped forward, and despite being nearly a foot shorter than Viper, he took an involuntary step back. "That I'd bled for this country? That I'd earned the right to be treated with basic human dignity? Or just that I could hurt you in ways you can't even imagine?" "All of the above," Viper admitted, his voice small. Sheriff Hayes had moved closer, her official authority now backing up the moral authority that filled the room. "Gunnery Sergeant, would you like to press charges for assault? We have plenty of witnesses to the unwanted touching and destruction of property." Jessica considered for a moment, then shook her head. "No need, Sheriff. I think Mr. Jackson and his friends were just leaving, and they won't be back. Will you, Mr. Jackson?" The threat in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Viper nodded rapidly. "No, ma'am. We won't be back. In fact, we'll make sure everyone knows Harper's is off limits. Completely off limits. And the other establishments you've been threatening?" Jessica's tone suggested this wasn't a request. We'll reconsider our business model," Viper stammered. "Kneel!" The command cracked like a whip, and Viper found himself dropping to his knees before his conscious mind could process what was happening. It was the voice of someone used to absolute obedience in life-or-death situations. "Ma'am?" He looked up at her, confused and terrified in equal measure. "You assaulted me, destroyed my property, threatened my workplace and my colleagues." Jessica's voice was calm, almost conversational. "In some parts of the world I've operated in, you'd already be dead. But we do things differently here. So you're going to apologize properly, and then you're going to leave, and you're going to spread the word that this entire county is under the protection of Marines who've seen scarier things than you on our easiest days." Viper's apology was stuttering but sincere, delivered on his knees in front of his entire crew and a bar full of witnesses. When Jessica finally nodded her acceptance, he scrambled to his feet and headed for the door, his fellow Desert Vipers following like whipped dogs. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "Can I ask, why hide it? Why pretend to be just a server?" Jessica's expression softened slightly. "Because, Mr. Jackson, real warriors don't need to advertise. We don't wear our strength on the outside. We carry it quietly and use it only when necessary. I came here for peace, to serve coffee and wipe tables and remember what it feels like to be normal. You took that from me tonight." The bikers left without another word, their motorcycles starting up with notably less swagger than they'd arrived with. Through the window, patrons watched them disappear into the night, and everyone somehow knew they wouldn't be back. As the sound of their engines faded into the distance, Harper's Roadhouse erupted in cheers and applause. Jessica stood in the center of it all, still holding the torn pieces of her server's shirt, still the same quiet woman who'd been wiping down tables 20 minutes earlier. But now everyone knew the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who choose to serve coffee instead of serving death, who find their mission in protecting a small roadside bar instead of conducting operations behind enemy lines. Jessica Harper, Force Recon Marine, had come home, and Harper's Roadhouse would never be the same. Thank you to everyone who typed respect. Your support honors every female service member who has served with dignity like Jessica Harper. These stories of courage and hidden strength need to be told. Women like Jessica prove that true strength isn't about size or appearance. It's about character, training, and the willingness to serve something greater than yourself.